Just imagine a world where AI-driven healthcare solutions are just as commonplace as taking your blood pressure or reading your temperature, where technology can accurately diagnose illnesses, manage hospital workflows, and reduce medical errors. We're standing on the cusp of this healthcare revolution, and it's essential to address the challenges and ethical questions that come along with it. In this episode, I'm joined by Mark Nevin, a seasoned healthcare leader at EY, and Mitchell Burger, a distinguished director at Sydney Local Health District, who's actively researching the safe and equitable implementation of AI in public health. In this episode today, we explore the complexities of AI in healthcare, from standards and publications to workforce upskilling and clinical governance, the intricacies of AI development, the role of leaders in overseeing AI implementation, and the importance of trust and transparency in AI-driven solutions. Collaboration starts with a conversation, Team Health Tech. Let's make it happen. This is Talking Health Tech with me, Peter Birch, featuring content and community about technology in healthcare. Mitch and Mark, how are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, very well. Thanks, Pete.
Good to have you on the show today. Thanks for making the time. It's great to have some two different perspectives coming at a very topical discussion, which we're going to dive into now. But let's help set the scene a little bit more. I'll get you to introduce yourselves. Mark, tell us about yourself.
Morning, Pete. So I am Mark Nevin. So I originally trained as a clinician, retrained as an economist, and specialised in public policy. I've worked in the space of health policy and strategy for many, many years, largely in sectors that are very reliant on medical imaging. So in the optometry sector, radiology, and radiation oncology, all three which are being revolutionised by AI, and I've been working in that space for, say, the last 4 to 5 years.
Got it. Excellent. And Mitch, what about yourself?
Hi, thanks, Pete. So Mitch Burger's my name. I'm Director of Strategy, Architecture, Innovation and Research at Sydney Local Health District. I work part-time there. I'm also doing a PhD in AI implementation at UNSW in the School of Population Health, and I've got an adjunct position at USyd in the discipline of Digital Health and Biomedical Informatics. So AI is a bit of a passion for me.
I was going to say, if we've got the both of you on this show for an episode, it would be disappointing if we didn't cover AI in healthcare. I think that's going to be a very central theme to this discussion, and not just to this discussion, but generally as well, where, AI in healthcare has been a topic that's always been interesting, but it feels like in 2023, it's really getting to the next level. Mark, you followed it through for quite a long time. There's a lot more attention on AI now.
No, look, absolutely. So it really initially started out with radiology sector and looking at the significant potential for analysis of images as well, and breaking down images and filtering those through algorithms, etc., and predicting what exactly is showing in those images, like looking at abnormal versus normal. There are multiple potential applications. So medical imaging and diagnosis is probably where it's gotten most traction over the last number of years, but there's a range of other even operational aspects like hospital workflow management, payer solutions, looking at quality and safety things as well, like medical error reduction as well. The whole realm of precision medicine, AI is a critical enabler in respect of that. So yeah, AI looks like it's on the verge of going mainstream, which is very exciting.
Very exciting. It also brings new complexities and, well, not new complexities, brings complexities nonetheless. And in healthcare in particular, ethics comes up often as the one thing to address when it comes to really embedding artificial intelligence in healthcare, right?
Look, absolutely. So I guess I've been working in this space for a number of years, and I think when considering the deployment of complex new technologies like AI, it's really time to look at, from an ethical perspective, the issues around safety, the potential for bias, and how that can influence decision making. Given the black box type nature of AI, complex questions can arise in respect of accountability, the workforce readiness to work and practice safely alongside AI. Like, what is, I guess, the transparency of some of those tools, and how can a clinician understand and interpret that and give, I guess, advice to a consumer, the patient, who's the key participant at the end of the day. It's going to bring new players into the healthcare space, like data scientists, and how are they going to incorporate within a team. So managing the risks that come up with that, there needs to be a solid governance framework overarching all of that to ensure that those risks are, I guess, thought about and managed in a systematic way.
Yeah. And, Mitch as well, I can see you nodding along there. But, even thinking, we've always talked about in health about how we need transparency and no black boxes when it comes to artificial intelligence in healthcare. And that, if you're not really in it, you might know those words, but you don't exactly know what that means. And I think more recently, as more and more of us are being exposed to AI, everyone's playing with Chat GPT. You kind of for example, you put something into a tool like outside of health, and then it just gives you an answer, and you're like, thanks, that's good. That must be right then. So is that whole kind of black box mentality thing? Because in a fun little content creation way, that's a bit of fun. In healthcare, you kind of want to know where it's got that answer from.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that for clinicians who are over time going to be increasingly relying on these sorts of technologies, that's a really important question, because they're used to, in their roles, being able to completely assure the information that goes into their decision making. And AI poses a different role, and it broadens the set of people within a district or within a health service who have accountability. And I think it raises questions like whether it's appropriate for clinicians to have to assure the validity of those decisions that machines are making. We're sort of just starting that journey, I think, in practice, trying to understand, well, how are we going to share accountability across decision-making systems? As Mark said, it'll really sort of change our clinical governance and our insurance paradigms, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's right. We can't put this thing back, can we? So we're going to have to deal with AI, which is a good thing. It's not dealing with it in a bad way, but we need things around it to be able to use it effectively. So Mark, then is that where the standards and those guardrails come in to help put those things in practice?
Look, absolutely. So I worked at the College of Radiologists for a number of years, and the radiology sector, I think, has been a leading light in this respect. So while I was at the college, I worked very closely with the board and the faculty councils and some of the senior clinicians and senior staff to really determine like how that sector ought to respond as well, and what levers it has to pull in order to do so. So we thought long and hard about where exactly we could influence. So we looked really at ethics, number one, as a leading body in radiology, and shaping how the technology would come to market via the ethics, but also look at the standards of practice as well in relation to deployment, some of the key critical guardrails. How does the workforce change and upskill as well to practice safely alongside AI as the entity which sets the training curriculum for radiologists and radiation oncologists? That was a key lever that the college had, but also the other components in relation to regulation as well, ensuring that AI is regulated appropriately under. At the minute, it's regulated under software as a medical device. But so breaking those down, I guess in turn. So in terms of like the standards, so standards of practice are critical to really guide deployment at large scale, because it sets an industry best practice, and looking at what evidence is available, and then where there's no evidence, what consensus you can develop through the process of developing those standards. So in terms of standards, I think there's some critical components around. Firstly, standards to guide procurement of AI tools, which is really to look at the suitability of that AI tool for a particular patient cohort. Like in an Australian context, has it been exposed to data in relation to First Nations communities? So you really need to look at, from a standards perspective around procurement, to interrogate the data that the AI tool was trained and tested upon, and then to see whether those findings are transparent and explainable by human expert. I guess next component is really looking around workforce as well, and ascertaining whether your workforce needs to be trained and upskilled in respect of AI generally, but then the specific tool that's being deployed. So the workforce clinicians are working alongside it, understand the shortcomings of that technology, and where and how they're going to give oversight in respect of that, and also communicate the findings from that technology to a patient. There's also a really important governance component as well in relation to standards. So clinical governance looks broadly at developing protective measures, i.e. safety measures, and productive measures, which are around continuous quality insurance assurance. So clinical governance also takes responsibility for the upskilling of the staff and really determining where accountabilities would lie in respect of the technology. So what the clinicians are accountable for, what the hospital or practice group is accountable for, and whether there's any accountability for the AI supplier because of the black box nature of that tool. So standards of practice can really frame all of that and give then on an ongoing basis. So that's the initial deployment, and then ongoing auditing and monitoring to see if the technology performs as expected. So in summary, then I guess they're the key guardrails that the standards can bring.
And as well, that brings trust, and not just it brings the quality side and those elements that you mentioned too, but then this whole issue around trust and AI. If we can put trust comes from understanding generally, and people, while they don't need to understand, not everyone needs to understand the technical complexities of artificial intelligence and become coders, but people in health understand standards and the guardrails, and if there are those rules there, that gives us something to build from.
Yeah, no, exactly. I'm working in consulting these days, and a lot of the conversation I have in relation to AI are around that trust piece and the readiness piece. So there's trust from a procurement perspective, so trusting your health leaders that you've actually done your due diligence in respect of the technology so that you can deploy it safely. But even AI companies trying to engender trust in their technology around how it's been ethically developed. They've had medical or other input in relation to the development of that technology so that they've thought about the end user while it was being developed. So trust is critical in respect of these new technologies. Absolutely right, Pete.
And Mitch, I see, Mark's making some great points from, from what he's seen and from the consulting side. I'm going to totally reword that and make me sound much more intelligent in post-production. So Mitch, the points that Mark's raised, they make sense to me conceptually, but you're seeing things on the ground in the health district. Are these types of themes and topics and points resonating within Sydney Local Health District?
Yeah, absolutely. But you picked up on a good point, Pete. They're very theoretical. I think 2019 was been referred to as peak AI principles. There were thousands of ethical frameworks and best practices produced globally. And I think the real issue for frontline health services is the gap between those technical standards and principles and actual practice. And that
find that which is the best of the best standard.
Exactly. No. Literally, there are frameworks that are assimilations of other frameworks. Yeah, right. It's just it's out of control, and the sort of the world's moving a little bit towards what would be called operationalization of principles, whatever that means. So and it's not it's not unique to AI. Like in cyber, we've got well-established technical standards, regulatory bodies, policies, and we're still pretty far off achieving those at reasonable levels of maturity. So it's going to be a big job over many years to build our institutional competencies in this. And to give you an example, Mark, your first point about ensuring that the systems we're using are not subject to discriminatory bias. We've just taken a big project of ours through the relatively new New South Wales AI assurance framework process with the AI Review Board. And their recommendations were really constructive and positive. And one of them was around assessing that the technology we're using, happens to be wound care, is suitable for our population. And which is completely legitimate, and though it raises tensions for us in the district because that product has got TGA approval. It's been developed using an incredible amount of data it's a US-based product. And it's been the subject of 2 RCTs. So it's incredibly well validated from our point of view. The question is, how much responsibility does a frontline health service have to assure a technical product that's already been through regulatory approval? And so the utility of those regulatory processes is really, we don't want to have to redo everything. We want to be able to sort of buy and implement these products in the same way that providers, suppliers who are trying to, get their products used by health services to create the benefit that AI offers, they don't want to keep having to ask and answer the same questions. So I think that's a real tension point for health services. Yes, the assurance process is critical, of course it is, but at some point we want to be able to rely on the regulatory processes and point to them and say, well, this has got approval, we're just going to start using it and get the benefit.
Yeah, I mean, because we talk about regulation and how that, in the innovation side, the creation of the technology, how does governance slow down innovation and create barriers? But the counter argument is, well, lean into it, and then that allows you to innovate and build. The same goes for execution implementation too, though, is that if it can certainly fast track the execution and the implementation of some of these tools, but you don't want it to have to continually redo the same work, as you say.
Yeah, and you're right, Pete. It is, in that way, a robust regulatory process to approve these products for use is an incredible accelerator. Because if we might shepherd it in our district through the RCT process, but then other health services can rely on that experience and go for it. That's it's incredibly important, the robustness of those regulatory processes.
I might add a couple of points there. So I think the purpose of the regulation for medical devices is really to ascertain whether they're safe to place on the market for sale. So that doesn't determine that it's safe to be used in every context across a variety of different healthcare settings. Because in the delivery of healthcare, there's multiple different components and enablers in respect of when you're delivering healthcare. There's the software, there's also the hardware equipment that's used. There's a range of other medical devices and such. There's the workforce as well, the variety of different clinicians that are used. So you've got to think more broadly in respect of whether the AI tool is suitable. Just because it's been regulated and placed on the market, that doesn't mean that your workforce is already ready to go in respect of that. And I think for me, this is where clinical governance becomes really important around taking the fact that the tool is regulated, say, right, it's safe to place on the market, but is it suitable for use in our context? And the standards of practice and ethical guidelines, etc. Yes, they are a bit abstract as well in their application. So someone needs to sit and think, how do we apply that in the context of our own clinical setting? And then what upskilling do we need for our own workforce as well in respect of practicing safely alongside this technology? So that might be allied health professionals. It might also have a role for nursing. There might be a role for medical professionals as well in that respect. And thinking through who's going to be overseeing the technology as well and applying the findings of that technology and placing that in the context of an individual patient's characteristics and needs, desires, preference, etc. So there's a really important human element around how you apply these technologies, which is never going to be covered by the regulation piece.
Yeah, it's just it's part of the puzzle. And I think you're right about clinical governance, Mark. I'll give you an example, Pete, if that's okay. From we've just about finished some research into remote monitoring and the viability of some of the devices which we want to use for automated detection of deterioration for remotely monitored patients. And so, the sort of forerunner capability for real AI stuff. And, that research has taken a long time, a year, to assess 2 devices, pulse oximeter and a temperature probe, and 12 months of work. And it's really robust, but what it's done is raised questions about the fitness for purpose of that data for driving automated decision making. Is it valid and reliable enough to drive truly automated decision making? And those devices are approved for use. And then that raises the question: well, do we need to separately, independently conduct 12-month research projects on every device we want to use? Because there are 3,500 devices we could be using. So these are really for health services who are looking to try and implement these sorts of very complex models of care that embed use of AI. The how far you go on the assurance is a real question. It's obviously it's critical, and the assurance of that stream of data, whether it is fit for purpose, is a clinical governance question.
To that point, the amount of time and effort involved in that assurance process, the 12 months for something like that, it's not just annoying that it takes a long time. There's a cost associated with that too.
Exactly, and there's a cost for suppliers who are trying to get their products assured across multiple markets. It's a real balance. Do they have to do an RCT in every jurisdiction? Like, are we going to accept, a bit like we do with the FDA, extensions of an FDA approval process essentially within Australia? These are really valid and still open questions.
Yeah. We've talked about some of the challenges of AI systems in the real world, and something I think we were talking about earlier, Mitch, was this whole challenge. Like AI, there's one point around the diagnostic side, but particularly when it comes to the administrative side or efficiency gains, there's a level of irony of implementing AI solutions to make a process faster, which was originally a problem caused by technology. So there's this kind of challenge of technology being implemented to reduce the burden of the technology. So are we, do we run a risk of spiraling into this ever, never fulfilling prophecy of technology to fix technology?
Unquestionably. I find, we're sort of, I do think there's an opportunity outside the sort of clinical, pure clinical applications to do robotic process automation a lot more in health than we currently do. Those sort of really more corporate-y administrative applications are really where the technology is proven. But the RPA, the robotic process automation solutions we're looking at are sort of stitching together manual workflows that exist between existing IT systems, which is really, we're going to have an army of bots running around connecting our systems together, which is probably okay in the short term, but it feels, as you say, really ironic.
Right. So, but there's challenges there for health leaders in different districts too, when they look at this insurmountable task of existing systems that are it's not just it'd be difficult to iterate up to a stage where it's really efficient and effective. I guess what have you learned in that process of is it all too hard and you put it you defer it? Are there little baby steps you can take to try and see some gains to give confidence? Hopefully there's a light at the end of the tunnel for some of these health system leaders to implement some of these technologies.
Yeah. I mean, and it is really hard. Like we've put a lot of time into the sort of how we transition things from innovation and research land into production land, and that crossing that chasm from research and innovation into production at scale is, is for all the reasons we know, really, really difficult. But there are ways to do it. I think people who know me well will, laugh when I say this, but getting good at procurement is a really good way to do that, both on the supplier side and on, I'm in government, on the government side. If you get your procurement process well done, you can make that transition really effectively. If you're clear about what you're, whether it's a proof of concept, whether it's a pilot project, whether it's an operational footprint, for your system, you can really sort of streamline that process. And exactly as you say, you can start small with proofs of concept and then scale up. There's lots of support, certainly in New South Wales Health where I work. There's lots of support to do that if you sort of can navigate the process as well. But that also takes time, to get your head around, the arcane policies and things that are often in the case in government.
Sure. So, Mark, we've talked a lot about systems. We've talked a lot about the technologies. You touched on a few times the responsibility of leaders in this space, of the people, but also the enabling the workforce. This is just as much a people challenge as a technology one, right, Mark?
Look, absolutely. So maybe just bring that down. If we start with the leaders first, at the end of the day, leaders in healthcare are taking these calculated risks all of the time around deployment of new technologies. And my advice to them would be to leverage the processes that you already have in respect of things like procurement. So you can start to look at the technical readiness for an AI tool for deployment, leveraging clinical governance capabilities which exist across the board, just where the workforce upskilling is a particularly critical piece. And then we touched on a moment ago just around that whole accountability piece and people taking risks, but having these are essentially calculated risks, which you need to have a framework in place. So, like, you've analyzed the range of risks and you've got a method by which you're going to manage those. I think the workforce is going to be long term the really interesting piece in respect of AI technology. So I've been doing some other work and research in the AI implications for the health workforce and looking at with the existing duties that healthcare professionals have in respect of keeping a pace with new technologies and new treatments, processes, etc., with healthcare. The requirement to do continuous professional development is based on that need and duty to stay current in respect of how you practice healthcare. And as AI becomes embedded into routine practice, first of all, in respect of specialties that are using medical imaging, but then elsewhere as well, that there is a duty and a requirement to upskill for sectors in which AI technologies are pretty advanced. There's certainly an expectation from the global peak bodies and I guess standards entities around the workforce must upskill in those areas. And surveys of I guess young medical specialists and medical specialist trainees have really shown and expressed a desire to upskill alongside AI. So the health workforce, I think the bar is going to raise in respect of the baseline knowledge that you need to have to practice safely in your area of medicine. And when AI comes into play in a particular specialty, they don't need to understand exactly the ins and outs of how the technology is developed, but they need to have a broad understanding of how the technology is developed, not detailed, but also to understand the risks and the oversight procedures and things that they're responsible for when they're making a decision based on an AI tool. So I think the entire workforce longer term needs to upskill and reach a new, I guess, threshold for that.
I'll give you I'll give you a practical example.
Yeah.
Like, we're doing some research in early stage implementation of AI image processing systems. And the product we're using is approved under the Software as a Medical Device framework, but under the exemption within the framework that it does not provide a diagnosis. It's providing a decision support. Now, the clinicians who are using that sort of system will have to know that the thing that looks like a diagnosis and sounds like a diagnosis is actually not a diagnosis. And so they can calibrate how much they rely on it. And that's quite and like another example, this one we don't have anything to do, but many listeners will be familiar with the Babylon symptom checker that was used in the UK. The underlying system within that symptom checker was called the Babylon triage and diagnosis system. But the fine print about terms of use said it does not provide diagnosis. And so, if you're a clinician, like, is it providing a diagnosis or not? And if it's not, well, why are we paying for it? And I think that's the sort of the knowledge. It's not necessarily the technical knowledge, but it's knowing to what extent can I rely on this?
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. And therein lies one of the major challenges as well, because if you're using a technology that's right 70-80% of the time as well, there's a risk of automation bias, which is back to the conversation earlier about ethics. So that automation bias basically means you rely on technology that's right most of the time, and you basically fall into the trap of assuming that it's going to be right pretty much all of the time. You switch off some of your other kind of critical thinking as well, because the technology is right most of the time. So yeah, that's good enough as well. That's going to be correct. But in respect of healthcare, because of the relationship between the clinician and the patient and the service provider across that network, the clinician is responsible for the application of that AI in respect of an individual decision about a patient's diagnosis, treatment, management, whatever that might be. So the clinician is a regulated entity by the APRA structures within Australia. So at the end of the day, they're going to be responsible for, if something goes wrong in respect of that patient, a large portion of the liability will rest with them. If there's something wrong with the technology and the black box nature of it, there may be some liability for the AI supplier in that respect, but there's also some overarching responsibility for, I guess, the organization, say the hospital, that decided to implement the technology in the first instance. But when it boils down to how it was used in respect of a particular patient, the clinician remains responsible for that.
Do you think, Mark? I mean, get your crystal ball out. Is that always going to be the case? Because I know, like, obviously the premise is individual accountability, but when you're using systems that you can't possibly expect clinicians to introspect into and understand and assure, because they can't assure the data pipeline, they don't have time. Is it always going to be fair that they retain 100% accountability?
I don't think they will have 100% accountability, but I guess it depends on the instance that you're looking at. So I worked in professional indemnity insurance for a number of years. You have to go quite forensically in terms of when something goes wrong to break down the different steps along the way and who took responsibility for the different components of that. So in respect of AI, I think the framework to think about is really around shared accountability and shared responsibility for the different components of that complexity. But it's really, really important to get everybody on the same page around the upfront before you deploy the technology. So the standards of practice that have been developed previously looks at breaking down, allocating those responsibilities across, I guess, the different actors that are involved. Because at the end of the day, Mitch, you're right, it's going to be a shared accountability piece. Although when it boils down to use with a particular patient, and if something goes awry, it'll predominantly I be the clinician for the foreseeable future, but there are aspects of shared accountability because somebody, I guess, higher up the management structure may have made a decision. Yes, we're going to adopt this technology across the hospital for all presentations that come in, but in respect of its use for an individual patient as well, that clinician-patient relationship is what's quite special in respect of healthcare as well, and I think will be at the forefront for the foreseeable future.
I think what you said there, Mark, too, and I think what we've kind of just covered for the past couple of minutes, encapsulates that whole wicked challenge of healthcare and technology innovation, of the multiple stakeholders with different responsibilities and different accountabilities and different funding, and one conflicts with the other. And then if we can see those little steps forward of progression, it helps, us break out of some of these points. To close out some of this conversation, then, I think the past 20 or 30 minutes or so has given this, remarkably well-rounded overview around the opportunities with AI in health and the associated challenges and the way to address that. For those heads who are swimming with potential opportunities and excitement, or even just working out what they do now with this information, any final thoughts or ways to close out this discussion? I might go with Mitch first and then Mark to close up. Mitch, any final thoughts?
No, thanks, Pete. I mean, as Mark's been saying, I mean, I think there are lots of pieces of the puzzle that, in addition to regulation, I know I've talked a lot about that, but, workforce is a big issue. And I also think that it'll be important for health services, Mark, as you previously said, to think about, it's not a new thing. Health services are really, they're in the business of innovation. They're in the business of adopting new technologies. AI is another technology. And so, the existing governance processes, the existing frameworks we've got in place, our ethical principles, are well established and strong. And so how we augment those and tinker with them and tweak them to facilitate the use of AI, rather than having a whole new thing going on. I think it's going to be a process of augmenting existing ways of working and existing processes, that'll facilitate the adoption of AI rather than having a completely new framework. And it's going to take, it's going to take time is the other thing I would say. It's going to be a gradual process of building our institutional competencies across workforce and governance and understanding those, how our use of AI affects accountability equations and things like that. So, they're the 2 points I'd finish on.
What about yourself, Mark?
Look, I think there are quite a few complexities to wade through in respect of AI. AI is starting to get deployed at significant scale, and the whole wealth of new applications as well that are coming downstream. I think it's important really for a healthcare organization to really focus on 3 different components. So look at technical readiness as well for the adoption of that, how the data is going to be managed, the quality of the data used to train it, etc. I'm a big proponent of clinical governance as well. So trying to bridge that gap between the ethics and the standards and what's actually going to happen at the clinical coalface and how the workforce is prepared to work safely alongside it as well, and figuring out some of those questions in respect of accountability as well, and looking at breaking down the responsibilities and making sure every party's clear on where their responsibilities lie and how they're going to manage those. And we've touched on the regulation piece. You can't really rely on the regulation alone to safely deploy AI in a healthcare setting. But as Mitch also touched on, you really got to leverage your existing capabilities and learn from the safe deployment that's already happened in other parts of healthcare.
I couldn't have put it better myself. Mitch, if you want a gig as a podcast host as well, you're welcome anytime. Look, I appreciate, like, but in all seriousness, what a great way to be able to round out and understand these complexities and the challenges, but also the exciting opportunities of artificial intelligence and other technologies in healthcare. You're right in that there's going to take time, but hopefully through conversations like these, we can inch a little bit more forward and excite others to do the same. Mitch, Mark, I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
For more content and community about technology and healthcare, visit talkinghealthtech.com.